Good evening. You alright, everybody? Welcome back to Creepy Joints. My name's JT. Cheers for joining again. Tonight's a one that's unexplained. I can't explain it myself. It happened many years ago. February 1855 to be precise, because tonight's story is about the ghost on Campo Lane. The house on Campo Lane in this story were a normal house. Well, I say normal, it were a shop and it had living quarters, and down below in the darkness of the building was the cellar. Now then, if you know about cellars, and especially around Sheffield, and cellars are a dark, damp place, aren't they? With no light, a smell of earth, and in your cellar you feel a bit uneasy. And it were certainly an uneasy time in this story, let me tell you that. The family that lived in this house, this shop with the living room and cellar, got a visitor. They were taking in a lodger way back then into the family home of the shop. Now this lodger, this young lady, Harriet Ward was her name. She were a normal lady. She were a widow, and she moved in with the family, and they had an agreement. They looked after her as good Sheffield folk do. They didn't see her struggle. She came in and she paid a bit of board. Everybody in the house suddenly thought, we've got perfect tenant here. She's absolutely all right. She's a good lass. Harriet had an inkling into the supernatural. She were a bit sensitive, if you like. And word spread. That tenant you've got living in your house, she's a bit strange. You've got to put yourself in their shoes as a family, having a stranger in, somebody who they're looking after. And this Harriet, she paid away. She were good, she helped out, she did cooking. She paid on time, there were no trouble. She were a widow, she were probably still grieving. But she had this interest in spirits, if you like. She were basically a bit different, you know, a bit sort of tuned in to her surroundings. Not like everybody in the house. She were a little bit special with that. She had a bit of a gift, if you know what I mean. And back then, people didn't know what to make of it. They really didn't. And there were no such thing as vetting somebody to see if they were all right, to see if they were a good egg, a good character. No, there were none of that. So people made their own minds up, didn't they? Now, back in that time, word did spread, and people were talking, you know, judging like they do today. Now Harriet were drawn to this place, I believe. She were there for a purpose. It's like two worlds collided. Harriet were also drawn to somewhere in the house, and it were the cellar. She went down to the cellar one afternoon to do a mundane job. Probably take something to put away, bring something back, that type of thing. It were a shop, so they could have been storing anything down there, you know. And she goes down cellar. But when she came back, she told a tale that sent everybody curious in that house. According to Harriet, when she were in that cellar, she felt a presence. She looked round, and what Harriet said is she saw a lady stood in corner at cellar. Now it's dimly lit. She's just lost her husband. She's trying to start again. And when she goes into the cellar and sees that face of that woman in that corner, all grey, pale face and big dark eyes, she screamed. She screamed and screamed and came upstairs. And the first thing she did was tell the family, there's a woman in your cellar. There's a ghost in your cellar, and it's shown itself to me. Now, of course, all family, they didn't know what to believe. They went straight away, the family went and looked in the cellar because they didn't believe in ghosts, they didn't believe in supernatural. There must be a logical explanation, right? Or somebody in the cellar. They checked the cellar. Harriet won't go down in the cellar. She won't go back down in the cellar. But that's not where it all sort of ends, because for Harriet, this kept happening. Most days, she saw this figure, this woman gesturing out with her hands as if to say, help me, help me. But the woman was pained, and Harriet could tell. And Harriet, at every opportunity, tried not to think about this, but it even went on to when she went to bed at night to sleep. As soon as she shut her eyes, she daren't fall asleep, because this spirit, this woman, were in her dreams as well, coming close to her with that face, that grey face with dark eyes, holding her hands out as if to say, please help. Now, Harriet also said, which I find really strange, that the ghost that she saw were pointing to a corner in the cellar. In her dreams, it continued, because in her dreams that she had, the lady, the ghost, the grey lady, let's call her, pulled a paving slab up, and under that paving slab, what she'd been trying to show her and trying to tell Harriet were a bag, and the bag were full of gold coins. I find it really strange, if you can imagine, that she's seen this apparition, and as the more she sees it, the more this apparition is trying to talk to Harriet, trying to communicate, like, come here, look at this, you must come and look in the cellar. Under the slab in the cellar, there's gold coins. And she told the family, she said, I think she's here to tell us something. I think that there's gold in that cellar. None of the family believed her. Poor lass. Imagine torture of that. You're living somewhere in an house. You're trying to get this thing to the back of your mind, but you have to tell them because it's shocking. And you're telling them to look, and look, it's there, she said. She said it to the husband in the house and the wife. Please, tell me you can see it. But they couldn't see it. Nobody could see it in the house, just Harriet. Word spread up Campo Lane. Hey, and it travels fast. You know what it's like, even this day and age. It's lightning fast, but back then, word of mouth spread quick, because they were talking about gold, and they were talking about supernatural happening in an house. They were neighbours too. Kids used to come at night, because there were a rumour that you could see this ghost if you went up at a certain time at night, and if you went on your hands and knees and crawled across the cobbles, you could see through the cellar window, and you could take your chance, and you could stare down there and wait. Would you see it? But nobody did. Nobody did. As the word spread about this gold and this ghost, intrigue took place. There were a local church that sent people down to have a look. They sent a couple of people down, and they had tea that night. And whilst they didn't talk about it at table, they knew White Church were there, family. They were a bit embarrassed, if you like. But as it does over a meal, it came out and the conversation changed. And it changed really quick. Bang, with a smash. Because during that meal, she didn't just appear in the cellar. She appeared at the top of the cellar, and Harriet screamed the place down. She was absolutely uncontrollable, and she was full of fear. Because when she saw her this time, the ghost had no eyes. And there was blood all over her face and blood all down her gown. This was getting really serious. This message, what did it mean? The gold in the cellar. Nobody else saw it. The people from the church were like, what is she seeing? What is she doing? She's pointing at something. There's nothing there. The husband of the house stood up again and said, I've had enough. Enough of this nonsense. And he took off and he went down cellar straight away, and fair play to him. Can you imagine chasing after something that somebody's seen, that somebody's terrified about in your own house? I don't think I could have done that. And he ran straight down cellar. And show yourself, what's going on? Nothing there, nothing. Not even a spot of blood, nothing there. Harriet was absolutely distraught. No one could explain it. Nobody. That very same evening, it didn't just die down. Harriet could not get this image out of her head. She could not get this image out of her head. The visitors from the church, they didn't leave, like I said. They couldn't believe what they were seeing and hearing. Hannah and John Rollinson were the names of the people from the church. And they were respectable people, Anna and John. They didn't talk about ghosts and things like this. It were unheard of, but they wanted to help the family, so they came in good faith. But what they did that night was tell the congregation where they were going. And as soon as they did that, people started coming in, knocking on the door. There were crowds of people in that house that shouldn't have really been in there. They pushed their way in because they wanted to see something. They wanted to see what everybody were talking about, right? And outside, there were grown men lifting slabs up and getting the nails and their hands in the dirt, digging with their bare hands, because rumour had it that there was some gold. It were unbelievable. And if you can imagine your door open with people coming in, and you know, you're trying to make sense of everything, but your house is getting crowded with people. And there were men smoking the pipes. What's going off? We want to see what's happening. Where's the ghost? Show us the ghost. Where's the gold? Show us the gold. We're not moving. We need to see this. It became a complete farce. It became out of control. Hannah reached out to Harriet and took her hand and said, come on my dear, we need to go downstairs because there's people banging on the cellar window, there's people that need to know, and I need to come with you and tell you you're going to be all right. This is just, there's nothing to worry about, it's just hysteria. So Hannah held Harriet's hand and took her down, because Harriet wouldn't go back down in that cellar that night. Not when she'd seen that woman stood there with no eyes. You wouldn't want to go down, would you? Harriet and Anna went down into the cellar, and Anna wanted to put a cloth up to the window because kids were looking in. And she said, look, whatever's going off, let's get some peace in this house. Let me put something on that window. Harriet hung the cloth on the window, and they were still holding hands. And just as Hannah and Harriet turned to go together, they both saw the woman. The woman was in the cellar with them both. Hannah collapsed and Harriet screamed. She screamed from the guts of inside. She screamed out loud from the bottom of the cellar, and it lit the house up with fear. Men came in. What's going off? And when the men came onto the stairs, they saw Hannah draped down the stairs, laid lifeless. They picked her up. They took her back into hall. They were checking her. They were trying to get her to come round. You couldn't call an ambulance back then. There were no quick fix. You couldn't get a police person. You couldn't ring 999. They got her in a cart because Anna were from church. A lot of people were there for her as well. And Harriet were distraught. Anna were completely lifeless at this point. She'd completely passed out. After seeing this spirit, she became lifeless. They took her to the hospital and they took her to be looked at. This is not the worst part. 2 days later, 48 hours later, Anna died. She never come round. What did she see in that cellar? People say she died because she saw something she shouldn't have seen. She saw what Harriet had seen. Maybe it were only made for one person. Perhaps the spirit only wanted to tell one person about this gold, these coins. Anna weren't meant to see this spirit. Anna weren't meant to be part of this story. She came trying to help and she lost her life. And there's a saying in Sheffield, it'll freeten you to death. Was she scared to death? Did she die in seeing this spectre? What was the message that this ghost were telling? For me, when I looked into this story and went up Campo Lane myself and took it all in, you can imagine looking down into that cellar and seeing the grey lady. And I can imagine being there when all that fuss kicked off. And everybody that looked and everybody that went didn't see it. Harriet always saw it. And Harriet said, she'll come back. She'll return. Hannah passed away that day. No one knows why. Did she die of fear? Did she have a medical condition? Did her heart just stop? Was she freetened to death? Is that what happened? So what do you think of that one? Because I'm intrigued. For me, one person seeing something in a house that nobody else can see is very strange. Was that person in the right frame of mind? Did they genuinely believe that they could see something? Because they had hysteria. Maybe they'd got a problem, maybe they'd got issues, real issues, where you can absolutely sense and see something that's not there. And if that's the case, how come Anna saw it and screamed so loud and then died 2 days later, having never regained consciousness? What if that spirit were of a woman who were killed, done away with, over some money, over some coins, or some gold, or some riches, and she wanted to show that them coins were still there? She couldn't rest. She were a wandering spirit beyond the veil that could not rest that evening, and she couldn't rest in that house. She couldn't have peace because that house had a secret. There were buried gold, and only one person should have been shown that, but for some reason 2 people saw it, and one person paid the ultimate price. If you've got a story that's local to around here or Yorkshire that's unexplained, let us know. Drop it in comments. Who knows, I might even talk about it on here. But stay safe out there. Thanks for watching again. I think this one's really got to me and resonated with me because I love Sheffield and I work in Sheffield. I love the people here, the buildings, the history. And it's just 2 minutes away from where I work is Campo Lane. Now it's got shops there. Is one of them shops that shop? Who knows? It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Now, I think, again, this is just a case of we'll never know. However, how can you say that 2 people saw that thing and one died? And why did it choose them 2 people? And why did they both see the same thing that night, back in February 1855? The Grey Lady in the Cellar, Campo Lane, Sheffield.